loud. There we go. Okay, we are recording. This is week 2 of the iPhone photography training. Now let's share the screen. Here we go.
Do you sometimes get iPhone photos that are out of focus? If so, you're definitely not alone. While the autofocus of the iPhone usually works fine, there are also times when it doesn't work. And that's when you end up with blurry photos that you can't possibly use. But it really doesn't have to be that way. My name is Anil Pakarklis. I'm the founder of iPhone Photography School. And in this short video, I'll reveal 3 secret iPhone camera features for getting perfect focus. Once you start using these 3 secret features, your iPhone photos will always turn out tack sharp. Now, if you can't hear me, please tap on this video to turn on the sound, and then we can get started. One of the most common reasons iPhone photos end up blurry is because the focus is not set correctly. So how do you set focus on the iPhone? Actually, it's really simple. Let me show you how to do it. So when you first open the camera app of the iPhone, you'll see that the iPhone has already picked somewhat of an average focus for this photo. And we have these beautiful flowers in the foreground, as well as the street buildings in the background, but neither of them is really in focus because the iPhone has tried to make sure that as many parts of the photo as possible are in focus, and as a result, nothing is really in focus. So in order to fix that, all you have to do is use your finger and tap it on the screen where you want the focus to be. So right now, I'm going to tap on this flower in the foreground, and you'll see this yellow box appear, and that means that the focus is now set on the flowers in the foreground. Now, if I want to set the focus on the buildings in the background instead, all I have to do is tap my finger on these buildings in the background, and you'll see that now these buildings are in focus, but the flowers in the foreground are no longer sharp. Now, when I set the focus here on these buildings in the background, the image also became a little bit darker. And that's because when you're setting focus, you're also adjusting how dark or how bright the photo is going to be. So if that's a problem, it's really easy to fix. And all you have to do is simply swipe your finger up or down the screen like this, and you can make the photo darker or brighter if you need to do that. So now that I'm happy with both focus and exposure, I'm going to go ahead and take another photo. And if we compare these 2 photos side by side, we see that in the first photo, the flowers in the foreground are nice and sharp, but the buildings in the background are out of focus. While in the second photo, the buildings in the background are in focus, but the flowers in the foreground are no longer sharp. So the bottom line is this. If you want to make sure that your iPhone photos turn out great, you should always set the focus yourself. Otherwise, you're leaving your photos up to chance. Sometimes they'll work out, and other times they won't, but you will not get consistent results. Now, the technique I just shared with you works really great, but there's one problem. Every time you take a shot, or every time something changes in the scene, the iPhone will automatically reset back to autofocus. And whatever changes you've made to focus and exposure will simply disappear. Now, obviously it's a problem, especially if you want to take several photos where the focus is the same. But luckily, there's a very easy way to fix that. And that is by locking the focus. So let me show you how to do that. So in order to lock the focus, all you have to do is simply tap and hold your finger where you want the focus to be set. So I want to set the focus on this wall in the background. So I'm going to simply tap and hold my finger there for a couple of seconds until the letters A, E, A, F lock appear at the top of the screen. And that tells me that both focus and exposure are now locked. And no matter how many photos I take, and no matter what kind of changes happen in the scene, I can be confident that the focus will remain unchanged until I switch it back off. Now, this technique is particularly useful when you're expecting a great photo opportunity and you want to be prepared in advance. For example, I'm sitting on the side of this little beautiful street, and I know that eventually some people will walk past me. And when that happens, I want to be ready to take the photo. And because of that, I'm locking the focus in advance. I'm going to already frame the shot, and I'll shoot it through this beautiful green grass in the foreground so that my subjects will be partially obscured. So now I simply have to sit here and wait until someone walks past me. Okay, so now I think the moment is right. So I'm going to take several photos, and you can see that no matter how many photos I take, the focus remains locked, and the beautiful green grass in the foreground is still blurred out. And these are the kind of photos I can only take by locking the focus of my iPhone. Next, I'd like to share with you an advanced technique for setting focus accurately in your iPhone photos. And this technique is particularly useful when your subjects are small or they're far away and you want to be absolutely sure you've set the focus the right way. So if we look at the scene, you'll see that my wife and my daughter are standing here on this beautiful street. And I'd like to set focus on them to make sure that their faces are perfectly sharp. But if I simply tap my finger on them, I cannot be absolutely sure where the focus goes. Maybe the iPhone does a good job and the focus goes on the subjects. Or perhaps the focus is instead set somewhere into the distant background. And I don't want that. So in order to accurately set focus on my subjects, what I can do is use two fingers to zoom in and to get really close to my subjects like so. And then I can tap and hold my finger right on the face of my subject like so until the letters A, E, A, F lock appear. And now I've locked the focus on my subject. But I'm not going to take a photo while I'm zoomed in like this, because this photo wouldn't be of high quality. The iPhone uses digital zoom when you zoom in too much, and what happens is that you lose photo quality if you take zoomed in shots like this. So instead I'm going to use two fingers again, this time to zoom out, and I'm going to zoom all the way out, but you'll see that the letters A, E, A, F lock are still there, which means that the focus is still set on the face of my subject. And if I now take some photos, you'll see that my subjects are still perfectly sharp. And I'm confident that their faces will be in focus, even though they're far away. And this is how you can accurately set focus when your subjects are far away and when it's really important that they are perfectly sharp.
Not sure what happened.
Do you sometimes get iPhone photos that are out of focus? If so,
maybe that one was over.
in this video, we're going to talk about exposure. And I'm going to show you how you can set exposure in your iPhone photos to make sure that the light in them appears just right. Now, in case you're new to photography, you might be wondering what exposure is. And in very simple terms, when I talk about exposure, what I really mean is how much light you let the iPhone camera sensor to capture. So you get the option to either underexpose or overexpose your images, meaning that you can make them brighter or darker. And that's what exposure is all about. So right now, I'm going to show you how you can adjust exposure on your iPhone, and then hopefully these terms will make more sense to you. So if we look at the screen of the iPhone now, you'll see that we have this scene where we have this interesting geometrical pattern, and we have some very strong differences in light. For example, if we look at the foreground here, the foreground is in bright sunlight, whereas towards the background and towards the top of the image, we have dark shadows. And this is an example of hard light because there are huge differences in terms of how much light there is between the top and the bottom of the image. So this kind of gives me a problem. If I want to make sure that the foreground or the bottom of the image is correctly exposed, then the top part of the image becomes dark. So in a situation like this, the photographer has to make a creative decision as to which parts of the image will be correctly exposed. And the way you do this is very, very simple. And all you have to do is tap your finger on the screen to set exposure to the correct point. And that works just like focus does, which we discussed in the previous video. So if I want to make sure that the bottom of the image is properly exposed, I'll tap my finger here, and you'll see that the image becomes a little bit darker. Or if I want to make sure that the top of the image is correctly exposed, I'll tap my finger here, and you'll see how the entire image became so much brighter. But what's also happening now is that the bottom of the screen has become completely white, meaning that it's blown out. So if I take a photo right now, what happens in that photo is that there's practically no information saved in these white parts of the image. And when this happens, you get what is known as blown out highlights. And more often than not, the general guideline is to avoid blowing out the highlights, meaning that you want to make sure that there are no large white areas in the image, because these areas contain no information. And if you have to make a creative choice between underexposing your image or making it a bit darker, or overexposing, more often than not, underexposing is the correct choice, because if you then go on and edit your images, you can recover detail from the shadows or the darker parts of the image. But if you get blown out white highlights like we have on the screen right now, there's nothing you can do to recover any information from the white areas. Now, when you're working with exposure on the iPhone, sometimes it's not enough to simply tap your finger on the screen. And you might find yourself in a situation where you want to set focus at a point like this, but at the same time, you're not happy with this kind of exposure. Unfortunately, you can adjust focus and exposure separately on the iPhone. And to do that, once you've set focus and exposure on one point, as I've done it right now, by tapping my finger on the screen, I can then go ahead and swipe my finger up or down the screen to make the exposure darker or brighter again. So you'll see that the sun icon is moving up now, and the image is becoming brighter. Or if I go down, the image becomes darker. So this is how you can manually adjust exposure using an exposure slider. Now, the one problem you'll see is that once I take a photo, more often than not, the iPhone will reset exposure again. And that's because by default, the exposure is set to automatic. So just like with focus, we have the option to lock exposure. And in order to do that, what I need to do is tap and hold my finger on the screen, which is what I just did. And then I can still go ahead and adjust exposure and take some photos. But once you see the AF lock icon on the screen, you can know for sure that no matter what happens in the scene, both focus and exposure are locked. And you can take photos and the focus and exposure aren't going to change, or the light itself could change, or perhaps you could pick up your iPhone and go somewhere else, but focus and exposure will stay set on the same point. And this is very useful in street photography, as well as many other applications where you want to make sure that you can take several photos, but you only have to set focus and exposure once throughout the whole process. So this is how you set and lock focus and exposure. It is one of the key techniques you'll be using throughout the rest of this course and throughout your iPhone photography career. So make sure you practice this. So when you go out and take photos, be mindful of where you set focus and what the exposure is like. More often than not, you want to slightly underexpose your images, meaning that you want to make them just a tiny bit darker. And whenever possible, you want to avoid blowing out the highlights. So you don't want to have large white areas on the screen, as you can see right now. So that's how you set focus and exposure. Practice these techniques, and I'll see you in the next video. Congratulations for completing Module 1 of iPhone Photo Academy. The funny thing is that not everyone actually makes it this far, but you did, and to me that really shows how dedicated you are to improving your iPhone photography. Now, right now I'm going to give you a quick assignment, and the purpose of this assignment is to really get you started and to help you apply the things you learned in this module. So my goal is to give you a simple task that will help you internalize the key techniques you learned about in Module 1. So in order to do the assignment, first, I want you to join our private Facebook community, and you'll find a link to join the community below this video. So make sure you join the community if you haven't already. You'll have to request access to the community and we'll approve it within a couple of days at most. Now, if for some reason you're on Facebook under a different name than you used to sign up for this course, for example, if your spouse paid for the course, then please let us know what name you're using on Facebook by leaving a quick comment below, and that way we'll know we can approve your request. So once you're inside the community, I want you to take at least 10 photos using the focus and exposure techniques we discussed in this module. So in these photos, rather than using autofocus, I want you to actually adjust the focus and adjust exposure yourself manually using the techniques I showed you. Pick the best one of these photos. So take as many as you wish, but pick the best one and upload it to the Facebook community. And in the description of that photo, please let everyone know where you sit. Welcome back and welcome to Module 2. It's a funny thing, but not everyone who buys the course actually makes it this far, but you are here. And that's because you're well on your way to becoming a great iPhone photographer. In fact, now that you've completed Module 1, you already know more about the iPhone camera than pretty much all the other iPhone users out there. But this is just the beginning, and we're just at the start of Module 2. Now, I also hope you had fun with the assignment. And of course, the assignments we have in this course are in fact optional. If you don't do one of the assignments, nobody's going to come knocking on the door. But with that said, the more assignments you do, the more value you're going to get out of this course. And that's because true learning starts when you actually start applying the things you've discovered. And the assignments are designed to help you do exactly that, apply the things you've learned in this course. So please try to do as many assignments as you can. If you can't do a particular assignment for any reason, it is okay to move on and to come back to that assignment later. But keep in mind that the more assignments you do, the more value you'll get out of this course. Now, Module 2 is about advanced iPhone camera features. But please don't be scared of the word advanced. It's nothing to be afraid of. As always, we'll cover everything step by step, and I'll explain everything in plain English. So by the end of Module 2, even the most advanced iPhone camera features will no longer seem intimidating to you. Specifically, in this module, I'm going to show you how to pick the right iPhone camera settings so you can always capture your photos in the highest quality possible. Then we're going to cover burst mode, which is one of my favorite iPhone camera features, and it's perfect for capturing all sorts of action photos so that you can freeze the perfect moment in time. Then we're going to talk about HDR, or high dynamic range photography, which is a really advanced photography technique that allows you to create beautiful, well-exposed photos even in difficult light conditions. After that, we'll talk about panoramic photos, and I'll show you how to use the iPhone camera for capturing world-class panoramas. And finally, the last two videos in this module were created specifically for those of you who have an iPhone with two cameras at the back. So I'll show you how to use the dual lens camera of the iPhone and how to choose the correct lens for each photography situation. And then I'll cover the portrait mode. So you'll discover how to use the portrait mode to take those beautiful portrait shots where the background is beautifully blurred. So by the end of Module 2, you'll know more about the iPhone camera than pretty much anyone else out there. You will literally know the iPhone camera inside out. And because of that, your photos will become so much better. So without further ado, let's get started with Module 2. Now, as far as I know, almost nobody likes learning about iPhone camera settings. And I get that. It's not the most exciting topic. It's kind of technical. And you're here to learn about photography, not settings. Well, I get it, but here's the problem. Unless you get a camera settings exactly right, your photos will not be of the highest possible quality. And because of that, I've created this video where I'll walk you through all the most important iPhone camera settings, and I'll show you how to pick the correct values for each setting so that your photos will always turn out great. So the find the iPhone camera settings, we'll start by opening the Settings app on the home screen of your iPhone. From here, you'll scroll all the way down until you find Camera. Select Camera, and that will open the camera settings. Here, the first option that I think is really important is the grid setting. And by default, the grid is turned off. But if you turn the grid on, the next time you launch the iPhone camera app, you'll have 2 horizontal and 2 vertical grid lines on the top of the viewfinder. And these grid lines are really, really useful when you're composing your shots, which is a topic that we'll cover a lot more later on in the course. But for now, let's just keep the grid setting on. The next setting that I think is really, really important is the Formats option. So I'm going to tap on Formats, and this brings up 2 options. And I can choose between high efficiency and most compatible image file formats. So for those of you who are more technically minded, high efficiency corresponds to HEIF image file format, while most compatible corresponds to JPEG file format. High efficiency is a file format that's mostly used by Apple, whereas most compatible, or JPEG, is actually the most popular image file format in the world. So if you don't know what these acronyms mean, don't worry. You want to make sure you select the most compatible option. The benefit of high efficiency is that your photos will take up less storage space, but most compatible has 2 very substantial benefits. Number 1, these files are indeed more compatible, especially if you send them over to your friends who do not use Apple devices. But number 2, which is even more important to me, is the fact that most compatible images will actually be of higher quality. If you compare high efficiency and most compatible photos side by side, you'll see that the most compatible images will actually have more detail, and thus their quality will be better. And because of that, I strongly recommend that you choose the most compatible option. And finally, at the bottom of the screen, you'll see HDR settings. And HDR is a big topic that we'll cover later on in this course. But for now, I want you to take the Auto HDR option and turn that off. And the Keep Normal Photo option should be turned on. We'll return to these settings later on in the course when we talk about HDR. But for now, just make sure that your settings look the same as what you just saw on my iPhone. So now that we've changed these settings, let's open up the iPhone camera app and let's see what kind of options are available there. So now when we open the camera app, first thing you're going to see are the grid lines. So now on the screen, we have 2 horizontal and 2 vertical lines, and those are the grid lines. They'll be really, really useful for composing your photos, which is a topic we'll cover in depth later on in the course. Now, besides the grid lines, there are a whole bunch of other buttons on the screen. So let's walk through them one by one, and let me quickly explain what each of these buttons means. So we'll start with the top left-hand corner, where you have this icon showing 3 overlapping circles. And if you tap your finger there, the filter menu opens up on the right-hand side. And here, you can swipe through all sorts of different filters, such as Vivid Warm, Vivid Cool, Dramatic, and so on. And the way you can tell that one of the filters has been turned on is by the fact that the 3 overlapping circles icon is now in color. So every time these circles are in color, a filter has been turned on. If you don't want that, all you have to do is tap on that icon again and go back to original. I personally prefer not using these filters because there's so much you can do to improve your images in post-processing, and I like to take control of the editing process. And because of that, I personally never use these filters. So I'm going to stick to the original, which is no filter. And now to exit the filter menu, I'm going to press the 3 overlapping circles icon again. Now the next option you see on the screen is the self timer, which we already covered. And you have a choice between the self timer being off, or you can select 3 or 10 second self timer. Most of the time, you want to leave this off, which is what we're going to do right now. Now the third option, which looks like several circles, which are now crossed out, stands for live photos. And when this option is yellow, that's when you know that live photos are turned on. So the live photos functionality essentially records a short video just before and just after the photo that you take. And this is something that we'll cover a lot more in a future video. But for now, The general guideline is to keep live photos on every time there's movement in the scene or whenever you're taking photos of people. Since we have some moving water here, I'm going to leave the live photos option on. Next up, you see the letters HDR. So if you tap on HDR, you can once again choose between auto, on, or off. HDR is again a topic we'll cover in depth in a future video, but for now, let's leave it at auto, and a lot of the times the auto option will serve you best. So there's no harm in selecting auto most of the time. And finally, you'll see the flash icon, and you have the choice between auto, on, and off. And with flash, my general recommendation is to keep flash off. So that's the option I'm going to select. And you can see that now the flash is crossed out. Now, the reason I don't recommend using the flash too much is because the flash of the iPhone is relatively weak. It only works well when your subjects are really close to you. And even then, you may end up with unnatural looking colors and other potential image quality problems. And because of that, it's better to leave the flash off unless you absolutely need it. But for most photography situations, even in low light, I recommend keeping the flash off. And those are all the options you have on the left-hand side of the screen. And top right, you'll see the camera icon with two arrows in the middle. And if you tap on that icon, you'll switch to the front-facing camera. And this is me. And if I now go ahead and take a photo, this is how you can take selfies with the iPhone. Now, the one thing you should keep in mind, though, is that the front-facing camera is substantially worse in terms of image quality than the back cameras. So while it's fun to take selfies with the front-facing camera, generally speaking, you should only do serious photography with the back cameras because those are substantially better in terms of image quality. So I'm going to switch back to the back camera by tapping that icon again. Now, as we move down, you'll see the big shutter button, and that's pretty straightforward. You just press that and a photo is taken. Now, to the left from shutter, you'll see a circle that says 1x. And this option is only on the iPhones that come with two cameras. So if you tap on that 1x, 1x turns into 2x. And now you're using the telephoto lens of the iPhone. If you tap on 2x again, you're back to the wide angle lens. Not all iPhones have this option, so you'll only see this on the screen if your iPhone has two lenses. And finally, on the right-hand side of the screen, you have all the different shooting modes of the iPhone camera. So currently, the photo mode is selected, and you can tell that because the letters photo are yellow. But as you swipe your finger vertically up or down the screen, you can switch between all the different photo and video modes of the iPhone camera. So if we go down, we have the video mode, which is the mode you'll be using for taking regular videos. Under that, there's a slow-mo mode for taking slow motion videos. So those are videos where everything's moving really, really slow. Under that, we have time-lapse videos, which are essentially the opposite of slow motion. So time-lapse videos are moving really, really fast. If we then go up above the regular photo option, you'll see the portrait mode. The portrait mode is not available on all iPhones. We'll cover portrait mode extensively in a future video, but for now, just know that this is the option you'll be using to create beautifully blurred backgrounds when taking portrait photos. Next to portrait, you'll find the square mode. And this is just like the regular photo mode, but this time you're only taking square photos. And while this may seem like a great idea, what's really happening behind the scenes is that the iPhone is cropping your photos before they're even taken. And when you take a square photo like this, there's nothing you can do to expand it back into the full size. But if you take a regular wide photo, it's very easy to crop that into a square. And because of that, my recommendation is to not use the square mode. You can always take a regular wide photo and crop it into a square if you have to, but you can't really do the opposite. And because of that, I recommend that you avoid the square mode. And finally, there's the pano mode, which is what you use for creating beautiful panoramic photos, which is another topic that we'll be covering later on in the course. But for now, I'm going to go back to photo, and that is the mode that we'll be using throughout this course. So in the photo mode, I'll go ahead and take another photo. And if I want to review the photo that I've just taken, what I have to do is tap the photo icon at the bottom right-hand corner, and this is how you can preview all the photos that you've just taken. So there you have it. We've just reviewed all the most important iPhone camera settings and shooting modes. We'll be returning to many of these settings and shooting modes later on in the course. But for now, please use the settings I just described, and those will get you the best results in most shooting conditions. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next videos where we go more in depth in a lot of the features I just described.
Okay, we're gonna stop it there. I learned a lot. It's pretty cool.